400 years of fear could not prepare him for cold. Not the elegant, distant cold of moonlit stone corridors or winter air gliding harmlessly over immortal skin, but the brutal, gnawing cold that crept into bones and refused to leave. The kind of cold that made fingers stiffen, breath hitch, and dignity crumble alongside pride. Sebastian Blackthorne, vampire king of the northern realms, lay face down in the mud just beyond the iron gates of his own castle. Hours earlier, he had ruled from a throne carved of obsidian and bone. Now he wore rags soaked through by rain, his cheek pressed into frozen earth, his chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths like a dying animal. This was not an accident. This was punishment. The High Council had called it the trial of humility, an ancient law invoked only when a ruler was deemed too powerful, too distant, too cruel to remember what mercy felt like. Sebastian had laughed when they spoke its name. Kings did not kneel. Kings did not beg. The council had smiled when he said that. They stripped him of everything in one merciless ritual. His strength vanished first, draining from his veins like spilled wine. His heightened senses dulled. His immortality folded inward, leaving behind a fragile human body that shook uncontrollably in the storm. Worst of all, they cursed him with silence. For 3 nights he could not reveal his identity. Not with words. Not with power. Not even with blood. To survive, he had to receive true kindness. Not obedience, not fear, not reward, but compassion freely given by someone who believed him to be nothing. A beggar. A nobody. If he failed, the curse would not lift. If he succeeded, the throne would no longer belong to the man he once was. Rain fell harder, soaking his hair, plastering it to his face. Sebastian dragged himself closer to the gate, driven by instinct more than hope. Light spilled from the castle windows beyond, warm, golden, indifferent. Music drifted through the storm. Laughter. Celebration. They were already celebrating his fall. He tried to stand. His legs buckled. Pain lanced through his body so sharp it stole his breath. Sebastian clenched his teeth, refusing to scream. Kings did not scream. But beggars did. He curled inward, shivering violently, hunger clawing at his gut. Not the refined thirst for blood, but raw, humiliating hunger. The kind he had forgotten centuries ago. This was what it felt like to be human. He hated it. Footsteps crunched on gravel. Sebastian stiffened, heart racing. Guards? Hounds? He forced his eyes open just as a beam of yellow light cut through the rain, blinding him. Oh my God. The voice was soft. Female. Young. Afraid. You can't be here, she whispered. If the guards see you? Sebastian tried to speak, to snarl, to command her to leave. What came out instead was a dry, broken cough that racked his chest. His vision swam. The light lowered. She stood a few feet away, clutching a battered umbrella and a small flashlight, rain soaking through her thin work jacket. Dark hair clung to her cheeks. Her eyes, brown, wide, painfully human, stared at him with shock. Not fear. Concern. He recognized her by scent before memory caught up. Lavender soap. Soap cheap enough to be bought in bulk, the kind used by servants. She was one of the castle maids. One of the invisible ones. Are you hurt? She asked, stepping closer despite herself. Mud sucked at her worn shoes. Sir? Sir. The word hit harder than any blade. She knelt, ruining her uniform without hesitation, and reached for him. Her hand hovered for a moment, unsure where to touch, then settled gently on his shoulder. You're freezing, she murmured. You'll die out here. The king of vampires, reduced to something that could die from cold and rain. Water? Sebastian rasped. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced back toward the glowing castle, then at the dark woods stretching beyond the road. I can't bring you inside, she whispered. But I know somewhere. She slid her arm beneath his, bracing herself. He was heavier than she expected, dead weight, but she gritted her teeth and pulled. Lean on me, she said firmly. Come on. The contact sent a strange shock through him. Not desire. Not hunger. Recognition. No one touched Sebastian Blackthorne without permission. No one ever had. They stumbled into the trees, rain muffled by leaves. She half dragged, half carried him toward a crumbling stone shed near the river. The door creaked open. Inside it was dark but dry. She helped him sit, then wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. I'll come back, she said. I swear. Don't move. Don't make a sound. She turned and vanished into the storm. Sebastian laughed weakly to himself. She wouldn't return. Humans never did. Sleep dragged him under anyway, feverish and fragmented. He dreamed of the throne, of blood pooling at his feet, of a woman laughing as his crown shattered. When he woke, light flickered against the walls. She was back. She carried a thermos and a wool blanket far too big for her thin frame. She shut the door, bolted it, then knelt beside him. "Here," she whispered. "It's just broth. From the staff kitchen." Steam rose as she poured it into a cracked cup. The smell, meat, herbs, warmth, made his throat tighten. His hands shook too badly to hold it. Without comment, she lifted the cup and pressed it to his lips. Sebastian drank. He drank like a starving man, tears stinging his eyes as warmth spread through his chest. She wiped his mouth with her sleeve, utterly unconcerned with the crest stitched there. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Lena," she said. "And yours?" He hesitated. "Arthur," he lied. "Well, Arthur," Lena said softly, tucking the blanket around him, "you picked the worst place in the world to collapse." Her eyes darkened. "The king here, he's a monster." Sebastian said nothing. "My father worked these grounds," she continued. "One night he didn't come home. They said it was an accident." Her voice trembled but didn't break. "So yeah, if he's gone, good." The shame was unbearable. She hated him. And she had saved his life. Outside, distant horns sounded. Hounds bayed into the night. Lena's head snapped up. "They're searching," she whispered. "We have to move." Sebastian closed his eyes. For the first time in 4 centuries, the vampire king was afraid. Not of death, but of becoming someone who didn't deserve to be saved. Morning arrived without mercy. Sebastian woke to the sound of hounds. Not the distant, ceremonial baying he remembered from hunts conducted for sport, but the raw, echoing roar of creatures bred to tear flesh from bone. His eyes flew open, heart slamming violently against his ribs, panic flooding him before pride could stop it. Human panic. The shed felt smaller, colder. His limbs ached as if he had been beaten. He pushed himself upright just as the door burst open. Lena stumbled inside, breathless, eyes wide with terror. "They found tracks near the gates," she whispered, slamming the door shut and throwing the bolt. "They've released the hounds. They'll sweep the woods next." Sebastian stood, swaying. The fever had broken, but weakness clung to him like a curse layered over a curse. "Then let them come," he muttered bitterly. "I won't be torn apart like an animal." She grabbed his shoulders, harder than he expected. "Stop talking like that. You don't get to die. Not today." Her grip was firm, desperate, protective. She inhaled sharply as if making a decision she couldn't take back. "There's only one place they won't look." He frowned. "Where?" "Inside the castle." The words hit him like a blade between the ribs. "You're insane," he said hoarsely. "Maybe," she replied. "But I'm alive. And if you stay here you won't be." She thrust a bundle of clothes into his chest. A crisp white server's uniform. Stiff collar. Polished shoes, one size too small. "They're short-staffed today," she continued quickly. "Big banquet. Lunar court. Half the servants quit last night because of the lockdown. I told Mrs. Gable I found a drifter willing to work for food." Mrs. Gable. Sebastian almost laughed. The head housekeeper. The woman who ran the servants with iron cruelty while never once meeting his eyes. He had approved her wages for decades without knowing her name. "You'll blend in," Lena said. "Keep your head down. Don't speak unless spoken to. Just survive. Survive." 10 minutes later, Sebastian Blackthorne, vampire king, lord of night, ruler of blood and shadow, walked through the servants' entrance of his own castle with his heart pounding like a frightened boy's. The kitchen assaulted him. Heat, noise, steam, clattering metal, shouted orders, the smell of roasting meat and fear. He pressed himself against the wall, overwhelmed. As a king, food had simply appeared before him. He had never seen the army of exhausted humans required to sustain immortal luxury. "You. New one." A sharp voice cut through the chaos. Mrs. Gable stood before him, broad-shouldered, gray-haired, eyes like knives. She looked him up and down with open disdain. "You look like you'll collapse," she snapped. "Can you lift a tray?" Sebastian straightened instinctively, years of authority surging to the surface. "I am more than." "Shut up," she barked, shoving a bucket and rag into his hands. "You talk, you're gone. Floors. Grand hall. Every inch. If I see dirt, you don't get fed." She turned away without another glance. Sebastian stared at the bucket. Rage flared, hot, violent, familiar. For a split second, the monster inside him screamed to be unleashed. He imagined ripping out her throat, painting the marble red. Then he felt a light touch on his arm. Lena stood beside him, pretending to arrange silverware. "Please," she whispered without looking at him. "For me." Her eyes flicked up. Fear. Not of him, but for him. The rage collapsed into something colder. Shame. He nodded once. And knelt. For hours, Sebastian scrubbed. On his hands and knees. The chemical burned his skin. His back screamed. His knees blistered. Vampires did not know pain like this. They did not know exhaustion. They did not know humiliation measured in inches of polished stone. As he scrubbed beneath a massive portrait of his ancestor, Lord Lucian Blackthorn, fangs bared in eternal dominance, footsteps echoed behind him. He froze. Voices followed. "So it's true," a deep male voice said. "The king is gone." Sebastian's breath hitched. Count Silas. Eastern Coven warlord. A rival who smiled with his mouth and plotted with his teeth. "Gone is such an inelegant word," came a smooth feminine reply. "Beatrice." Sebastian's grip tightened on the rag. "Sebastian has been relieved of duty," Beatrice purred. "The world requires firmer hands." They stopped directly in front of him. Sebastian lowered his head, heart hammering. He could smell her rose and venom. Feel her power radiating inches from his skull. "And the humans?" Silas asked. Sebastian kept them, restrained. Beatrice laughed softly. "He was weak. Sentimental. Under my rule they will remember why they fear the dark." Something inside Sebastian snapped. The rag tore in his hands. "Careful," Beatrice snapped, kicking his bucket. Dirty water spilled across his knees. Clumsy oaf. She never recognized him. Never once looked at his face. They walked away laughing. Sebastian stayed on his knees long after they were gone, trembling, not from fear, but from the realization that he had built a world where cruelty thrived unseen. That night, Lena found him behind the kitchens, shaking. She handed him bread. Her fingers brushed his. "Did they hurt you?" she asked. He shook his head. "They will," he said quietly. "If she takes the throne." Lena frowned. "You talk like you know them." He met her gaze, really met it for the first time. "Lena," he said, "if I told you the truth, would you still help me?" She studied him, searching. "Try me." His throat closed. Before he could answer, screams echoed from the courtyard. A servant girl had collapsed. No one moved. Except Lena. She ran. Sebastian followed. The girl convulsed, blood at her lips. Poison. A failed feeding, one of Beatrice's experiments. Lena knelt, fearless. "Get me water. Now." Sebastian acted without thinking. He remembered ancient texts, pressure points, human anatomy he had ignored for centuries. Together they saved the girl. When it was over, Lena stared at him, really stared. "You're not just a drifter," she whispered. "Who are you?" Footsteps thundered toward them. Guards. Sebastian stepped in front of Lena instinctively. Protective. Possessive. Kingly. And in that moment Lena saw it. Not power. Not fear. But a man who would kneel in the dirt for someone weaker than himself. The castle changed after that night. Not in ways most would notice. The chandeliers still glittered. The guards still marched in perfect formation. The guests still drank and laughed beneath vaulted ceilings carved with symbols of dominance and blood. But beneath the polish something shifted. Fear became sharper. Cruelty became bolder. And kindness, quiet, dangerous kindness, became an act of rebellion. Sebastian felt it in the way servants flinched when footsteps echoed too loudly. In the way Mrs. Gable's voice grew harsher, her punishments more public. In the way Beatrice's laughter carried through the halls like a warning bell. The queen-in-waiting was testing her power. And humans were paying the price. Sebastian continued working alongside Lena, day after grueling day. He scrubbed floors, carried trays until his arms shook, endured insults meant to break something inside him. Once, a noble spilled wine deliberately at his feet. "Clean it," the vampire sneered. Sebastian knelt without a word. Lena watched from across the hall, fists clenched, jaw tight. That look, anger restrained by survival, burned into Sebastian deeper than any wound. At night they met in the shed. Lena brought scraps of food. Bandages. Stories whispered in the dark. She spoke of her father. Of learning to disappear. Of surviving by being gentle in a world that punished softness. Sebastian listened. He had never listened to a human before. One night she asked, "What did you do before this?" He stared at his hands, scarred now human. "I ruled," he said carefully. She laughed softly. "Everyone thinks they rule something." "I ruled badly," he added. That earned silence. Then That's the first honest thing you've said. The hounds returned on the second night. This time they were inside the castle. Beatrice had ordered a purge. Any servant suspected of helping the missing king would be questioned, interrogated. Lena was taken. Sebastian heard her scream. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the sound of someone trying not to make things worse. He dropped his tray and ran. The guards dragged Lena through the west corridor, her wrists bound, her lip bleeding. Mrs. Gable followed, pale and shaking. She was seen near the outer grounds, Beatrice said calmly. Suspicious behavior. She was working, Mrs. Gable protested weakly. Sebastian stepped forward. Let her go. The room froze. Beatrice turned slowly, eyes narrowing. And who, she purred, are you to speak? Sebastian met her gaze. The air vibrated. Power stirred, locked behind the curse but not gone. I am responsible, he said evenly. Punish me instead. Lena twisted toward him. No. Beatrice smiled. How noble, she said. Very human. She leaned closer to Sebastian, whispering, I always wondered what it would take to make you kneel. She raised her hand. Sebastian moved. He shielded Lena with his body. The room erupted. Guards surged forward. Lena screamed his name, Arthur, but he didn't hear it. The curse shattered. Pain like lightning ripped through him as ancient power flooded back into his veins. His eyes burned blue. Fangs descended. The guards froze in terror. Beatrice staggered back. Sebastian stood tall. King again. Enough, he said. The word echoed with supernatural force. Everyone fell to their knees. Everyone except Lena. She stared at him, not with fear but heartbreak. You lied, she whispered. Sebastian turned to her, power roaring inside him, and for the first time since his fall, he didn't feel like a king. He felt like a man who had just lost the one thing that mattered. Silence fell like ash after a fire. Not the peaceful kind. No, this silence was sharp, stunned, and heavy with disbelief. Every servant, every guard, every noble vampire remained frozen where they knelt, their heads bowed to a king they had spent days ignoring, insulting, and abusing. Sebastian Blackthorne stood at the center of it all. Restored. Terrifying. Magnificent. And completely hollow. Lena hadn't moved. She stood inches away from him, her hands still bound, her face pale, eyes locked on his with an expression that cut deeper than hatred ever could. There was no fear in her gaze, only betrayal so raw it stole the air from his lungs. You're the king, she said quietly. Not a question. A verdict. Sebastian took a step toward her. Lena, Don't, she said, flinching back. Just, don't. That single step back shattered something inside him. Beatrice recovered first. She laughed, a brittle, furious sound. How touching, she sneered. The mighty king masquerading as a martyr. Playing servant. Playing human. Sebastian turned slowly, his expression turning glacial. You will be silent, he said. The force of his voice sent cracks spiderwebbing through the stone beneath her feet. Beatrice staggered, choking, forced to her knees by power she could no longer resist. You abused my people, Sebastian continued, his gaze never leaving her. You poisoned servants. You ordered purges. You broke ancient law. Beatrice spat blood and smiled. And you let it happen. For centuries. The truth hit harder than her words. Sebastian didn't deny it. Instead he raised his hand. Guards surged forward, dragging Beatrice away as she screamed promises of vengeance. The court erupted into whispers, fear rippling outward like a wave. But Sebastian only watched Lena. She was shaking now. Not from cold. From everything crashing down at once. Guards moved to free her wrists. She yanked away from their touch. Don't, she snapped. Don't touch me. She turned back to Sebastian, tears blurring her vision. Was any of it real? Yes, he said instantly. All of it. You watched me scrub blood from your floors, she whispered. You let them scream at me. You listened while I told you how my father died, by your order. Sebastian closed his eyes. I know. Her breath hitched. And you still let me feed you. Protect you. Risk my life for you. I didn't think I deserved you knowing the truth, he said hoarsely. That's not your choice to make, she shot back. She laughed once, bitter and broken. You talk about humility like it's some lesson you learned. But you still control the story. You still decided who got hurt. Her words sliced deeper than any blade. I never meant to. You never meant to, she echoed. Neither did any of them. She gestured wildly at the castle around them. That's the problem. Sebastian reached for her. She stepped away. I need air, she said. I need away from you. He let her go. That was the hardest command he had given all night. The castle celebrated by dawn. The court spun the story quickly, how the king had tested loyalty, how justice had been served, how order was restored. Beatrice was imprisoned. The nobles pledged obedience. The vampires toasted to Sebastian's wisdom. Sebastian felt none of it. Lena did not return to the kitchens. He searched for her scent in every corridor, every stairwell, every shadowed corner. Nothing. She was gone. He found Mrs. Gable trembling in the laundry room. She resigned, the woman whispered. Packed her things. Wouldn't take severance. Said she didn't want blood money. Sebastian dismissed the servants and sat alone in the throne room for the first time since reclaiming it. The throne felt wrong. Too high. Too distant. Days passed. Sebastian ruled, but differently now. Feeding regulations were enforced. Servant protections written into law. Compensation paid to families once silenced. It wasn't redemption. It was accountability. And it changed nothing about the ache in his chest. On the fourth night, he found Lena in the old gardener's quarters beyond the river, the place she went when she wanted to disappear. She stood with her back to him, staring out at the water. I won't ask you to forgive me, he said quietly. She didn't turn. I don't know how, she replied. I don't even know who you are to me anymore. He stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. I am someone who learned too late what kindness costs. She finally faced him. Her eyes were red. Exhausted. Older somehow. You fell in love with a version of me that wasn't real, she said. A weak man. A man who needed me. No, Sebastian said. I fell in love with the woman who was brave when she didn't have to be. She shook her head. You don't get to love me as a reward for learning a lesson. He bowed his head. I know. Silence stretched between them. Then she said, if there's ever going to be anything between us, it won't be because you're a king. His heart stuttered. It'll be because you choose to stay human enough to hurt, she finished. And change anyway. Sebastian looked up. Hope, small, fragile, terrifying, flickered to life. The court did not forgive Lena. They feared her. Fear spread faster than blood rumors in a vampire stronghold, and Lena Laurier, once an invisible servant, had become the most dangerous thing imaginable to the aristocracy. A human who had seen the king kneel. Whispers followed her name through the halls like ghosts. They said she had bewitched him. That she had manipulated the trial. That she was soft poison, seeping into the foundations of immortal rule. Sebastian heard every word. He said nothing. Instead he acted. New decrees were issued, quietly at first. Servants were granted protected status under ancient law. Feeding without consent was punishable by exile. Families once paid off in silence were summoned, compensated publicly, their stories recorded in the royal archives. The court smiled through clenched teeth. They called it weakness. Lena watched from a distance. She had not returned to service. She lived in the outer quarters now, earning her keep as a healer's assistant in the human village beyond the river. She treated burns, broken bones, sickness left untreated for generations. She did not use the king's name. She did not ask for his protection. That made her untouchable in a way power never could. Sebastian visited the village disguised, not as a beggar this time, but as a man without ceremony. He brought supplies. Funding. Apologies he never spoke aloud. He watched Lena work. She was different now. Straighter. Calmer. No longer shrinking when shadows moved. Pain had sharpened her, but it had not hardened her. One night, a vampire noble arrived at the village drunk on arrogance. He cornered Lena outside the infirmary. You forget your place, he sneered. You're still cattle. Sebastian stepped between them. Not as king. As man. You forget yours, Sebastian said softly. The noble laughed, until he looked into Sebastian's eyes. The village watched as the vampire fled. Lena said nothing. Later she confronted Sebastian. You can't follow me forever, she said. I won't live under your shadow. I'm not trying to protect you from the world, he replied. I'm trying to change it. She studied him for a long time. Then let me help, she said. That was the moment everything shifted. Sebastian invited Lena to sit on the council, not as queen, not as consort, but as witness. A human voice in a room that had never allowed one. The backlash was immediate. Elders protested. Nobles threatened rebellion. An assassination attempt followed, poisoned wine meant for Lena during a public hearing. Sebastian drank it instead. He collapsed in front of the entire court. The antidote had been prepared in advance. Lena watched him recover with fury blazing in her chest. That was stupid, she said later, hands shaking as she treated him. You think martyrdom fixes centuries of cruelty? No, he replied. But it proves something. What? That your life matters more than my pride. Silence fell between them. Slowly Lena reached for his hand. Not forgiveness. Not surrender. Just. The court began to fracture. Some followed Sebastian. Others plotted in shadow. The world was changing, and change always drew blood. But for the first time in vampire history, a human woman stood at the center of power and did not kneel. The rebellion began at dawn. Not with fire or screams, but with silence. The kind of silence that settles just before something breaks. Sebastian felt it before the messengers arrived. The air itself carried tension, sharp and metallic, as if the castle walls remembered every cruelty they had ever witnessed and were waiting to see what would happen next. 3 elder houses had withdrawn their loyalty. 2 border covens had closed their gates. And Beatrice's supporters, those who believed fear was the only law, had gathered in the eastern wing under the banner of tradition. Tradition, Sebastian had learned, was often just cruelty with a longer memory. Lena stood beside him in the council chamber, not dressed in silk or jewels but in plain, dark clothing. Human. Unbowed. The elders refused to look at her. Remove her, one demanded. This is not her place. Lena spoke before Sebastian could. This place, she said calmly, was built by human hands. Cleaned by human blood. Paid for with human lives. If I don't belong here, neither do your lies. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Sebastian did not silence her. He let the truth stand. The rebels struck that night. They tried to poison the blood vaults, blame humans, ignite war, restore the old order through chaos. Guards loyal to Beatrice turned on their own. The castle burned. Not completely but enough. Sebastian fought like a king reborn, not for dominance but for protection. He shielded servants, evacuated humans, restrained vampires instead of slaughtering them. Lena organized the wounded. Side by side, human and vampire bled together for the first time in history. By morning the rebellion was over. The elders knelt. Not out of fear. Out of defeat. Sebastian stood before the court, soot-stained, exhausted, his crown lying untouched on the steps below the throne. For centuries, he said, voice carrying through the broken hall, we ruled through terror and called it strength. We mistook obedience for loyalty. Silence for peace. He looked at Lena. And we were wrong. He turned back to the court. I will not rule a kingdom that survives by crushing the vulnerable. If that means I lose this crown, so be it. He stepped down. A murmur swept through the hall. Lena froze. Sebastian walked past her, removing the signet ring from his finger and setting it beside the crown. I choose to be worthy, he said quietly. Even if it costs me everything. The elders stared at one another. Then, slowly, one knelt. Then another. Then all of them. Not to the crown. To the man. An ancient law stirred, older than bloodlines or thrones. A ruler chosen by the people, not fear. The crown ignited with blue fire. It lifted. And settled back onto Sebastian's head. Not as inheritance. As judgment. Lena felt tears spill freely down her face. Later, when the castle was quiet again, Sebastian found her at the river. I didn't do this for you, she said softly, sensing him behind her. I know, he replied. That's why it matters. She turned to face him. You don't need me to rule. No, he agreed. But I want you to walk beside me, only if you choose to. Silence stretched. Then Lena smiled, small, real, earned. Not as your queen, she said. As your equal. He bowed. And this time it was not humility forced by curse or law, but love freely given. The castle would remember many things. But history would whisper one truth above all others. That the most powerful king they ever had became great only after he learned how it felt to be powerless, and loved anyway.